Welcome to the World Class Coaching Podcast with Sean Fedema and Matt Carroll. On this podcast, we work to uncover hidden gems and the hidden secrets of soccer throughout the state of New Jersey and beyond, as we look to give you tips, tricks, and things that you could take back to your program at any other level. Today's guest is a lifelong Bergen County resident, and his name is Jake Aferiat. This is his fourth year writing for NJ.com, where he covers boys soccer, wrestling, and softball, and also reports for the NJSIAA as well. He has won several statewide journalism awards during his time at NJ.com, and prior to that, held various roles with the Penn State student newspaper, the Daily Collegian. His passion is going beyond the box score and telling the stories of teams, coaches, and athletes across the state. And on today's episode, after discussing with him the philosophies that he's seen throughout covering the sport of soccer in the state of New Jersey, we're going to go into our special preview of the New Jersey State boys soccer playoffs.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the World Class Coaching Podcast. And again, with us here, we're really excited for this episode. We have NJ.com legend and reporter for boys soccer, Jake Aferiat. Jake, how's it going today?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. And before we even get started, Jake, Matt and I are both going to give you your props. And let's just get the first question off the bat already. How the heck do you and Lauren, as a two-person team, cover the entire state of New Jersey for boys soccer?
Yeah.
Because it's incredible the coverage you do.
Well, thank you. Listen, we certainly try our best. And, it's tough because there's always more that we want to do, and we always feel bad when there are great kids and great stories that we just simply don't get a chance to tell. But when you're dealing with 330, close to 400 teams, and it's two people, it is a lot. So we have to thank a lot of the coaches who make our lives easier, and who relay a lot of this information to us. A lot of the ADs, a lot of the refs who tell us things. So yes, it is two of us, but, without the coaches, we can't do our jobs. Without a lot of these other people giving us this information, we can't do our jobs either. So it's, there's a reciprocal relationship there for sure. But I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's, we're always so appreciative. I was reading your article that you put out there today, or the article is out on NJ.com about girls soccer. That was awesome. And I can only imagine just how much travel you put into it.
Yeah, so
you moving around.
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Bergen County, lived here my whole life, still live here. But so I cover the Big North, the NJIC, the Hudson County League, the NJAC, the Super Essex Conference, and then I also cover the Shore and the BCSL. And unfortunately, I just can't get to all these places. There aren't enough hours in the day. There aren't enough days in the week. And so, unfortunately, sometimes I've got to pick and choose and, prioritize, or I'll say, okay, hey, if BCSL team's coming up for a big non-conference game and they're going to play a short team, that'll save me the trip, or things like that. If it's, hey, Del Barton's coming to play Seton Hall Prep, that's a much easier commute for me than going out to Del Barton. So it really depends. But yeah, no, it is certainly a lot of travel. But it's nice too. I mean, I always tell people and joke, I'm like, listen, if I'm out somewhere and somebody's like, oh, I'm from this small town in New Jersey, you probably won't have heard of it. I'm like, given what I do, try me. I probably have heard of it. Yeah, but no, listen, I love it. It's great to go to all these schools and see all the different environments. And, to me, one of my favorite places to go is always Harvey Field in Kearney. I mean, it's Soccer Town, USA for a reason. And that to me, there's no venue quite like that. But, it's true of a lot of other sports and a lot of other places. I mean, Delray and Matt, I'm sure obviously the Den's a great place for a soccer game too. So there are a lot of great venues all over.
Great place to win, for sure. Yeah.
So it's a nice perk of the job.
And while we're giving shout outs, I gotta give a shout out to your colleague Brian DeKine, who was kind of the inspiration for this podcast. A while back, they used to do a podcast on NJ.com, and I texted Pritchard Fed, and I was trying to get the story right, but I believe he had the podcast. We all listened to it as a team, and he'd picked South Hunterdon over New Egypt. And he showed up at the game, and I said, hey. And I was introducing Brian to one of our starting center back, and I said, hey, Pritch, here's the guy that said you're going to lose today. And we ended up winning that game. And throughout the playoffs, he talked about all that and stuff. So I got to give a shout out to Brian. Who's, he's moved on now. He's on the professional side now, I believe. But he was awesome.
So Brian's great. Big mentor of mine. Big supporter and inspiration. But yeah, he's doing great things on our pro and college side. So if you're a Devils fan, if you're a Mets fan, Jets, Giants, we got a lot of good stuff coming on that pike too. So be sure to
and the Devils are finally good. The Devils are finally good.
Let's go Devils.
Let's go Devils.
Yeah. Devils.
Oh, that's awesome. So all right, let's get into it. Fed, what do you got next?
So my question for you, Jake, to start. So obviously, you're talking about all the different conferences and everything that you cover. So before we kind of get into talking about the different sections and everything, if you're going to give me, right, if you're looking, I'm sure you've done your research, you've seen all these different teams and everything. What are you seeing the most out of some of your favorites as well, as far as coaching philosophies, the way their programs do things or the way they run? What are some common trends that you're seeing, or you have any specific examples that you see?
Yeah. So, I think one thing, especially among the teams that have a lot of postseason success, and it's maybe a little cliche, but a lot of cliches have some degree of truth to them. The thing that I always talk to coaches about, especially this time of year after a big game, whether it's a county final, whatever it might be, is this notion of being battle tested and, playing a really tough schedule. If we look, especially at like the Group 1, the Group 2 level, the reason Glen Ridge is always so successful is, in my opinion, and, if you look back, a lot of it's because they're playing Seton Hall Prep, they're playing West Orange, they're playing a lot of these bigger schools. Waldwick, perennial winner in Group 1, same thing. Delran in Group 2, they're always playing these bigger schools, and they're always playing Shawnee and all these powers. And so I think...
Powers like Burlington Township.
Yes, of course. And, but I'm just saying in general, that's, to me, one of the biggest hallmarks of... hey, if you're going to go out and schedule tough games, that means you think your team's pretty good. And, certainly, if you're out there playing, Monroe or Hunter and Central or, pick a top 20, 25 team in the state, the odds are if that team's not in your section, well, they're going to be better than a team in your section that you might not see until the section final. So that, to me, I think is a big hallmark. The other thing I think, too, is, a lot of teams in New Jersey play similar styles. I mean, a lot of teams are very direct. A lot of teams like to play over the top and come at you. So I think a lot of the teams that find success are teams that, okay, if you can, possess well, if you can, control the middle of the field and do something different than what they've seen, I think that's also where, you tend to find success because... Again, a lot of the teams have great players. A lot of the teams have, are cohesive. But if they're all playing relatively the same, it's easy to game plan for. If it's a style that you're not used to, that can make it tougher. So I think that that's something, too, that, can make a big difference. And then,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned coaching philosophy. I mean, I think the one thing, too, is, treating... I'm not going to say... Let me think about how to phrase this. Basically, like showing the same level of respect and treating, the fifth guy off the bench the same way as you would your starters. And, really building a program, building a culture and saying, hey, you are just as much a big contributor as, our striker who's got 30 goals. And I think those type of sort of intangible things go a long way because, I'll cover games and I'll see teams where, a bench kid comes in and maybe the level of play drops off a little bit and then some of the starters get frustrated and start, bickering with each other. But, the teams that can really stay composed and, don't have a drop off or can stay composed even if, the starters aren't out there, I think that those are kind of all the hallmarks of successful teams.
Yeah, definitely in states with the depth.
I love that too because I was actually listening to the I Hate Soccer podcast. It's a new one that's coming up, and they were kind of talking about, especially how in this point of the season, it's really teams are winning games. It's who's going to switch off, who's going to make a mistake, because it's colder. It's not, August, everybody's clicking. You're making like 10 straight passes and everything. It's, who's going to stay locked in. Like, he's got the depth, the mental, and like you were saying, Jake, about just staying locked in, staying organized. Those are the teams. Like, I always pitch to my kids at Borough, like, I take a team like Princeton, right? So I know Ryan Walsh really well. Wayne Sutcliffe was there for a while, perennial power. They give up one goal a game, maybe a goal a game. Like, they're just always composed, always in control of the game, no matter, even if they're defending, they're so organized and well put together, and that's the difference at this time of year.
Yeah, I was actually talking to we played the game we played today. We were talking with the coach, and he was like, at this day and age, he's like, or at this point in the season, like, what do you want? Would you rather have your stud striker or your stud goalkeeper? And I was like, at this point, goalkeeper, like, these games are so intense and so tight. You have these, you don't go through PK shootouts the entire year unless you're playing in a, you're going deep into a tournament, and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, now we're gonna play shootouts because everyone's, you have high school kids that are, the season's on the line. So defensively, that cohesion definitely I've found is super important. So to kind of expand upon that, what are some of the, if you can, you don't have to name specific names, you don't feel comfortable, but like, who are some of the guys that have stood out as you see as like, you get to pick your starting program, your starting program from scratch, coaches that you're like, he does these things well. Like, I'd love to see this. This is the best of him. This is the best of him. Like, I guess kind of like from some of the guys or some of the things you've seen. What would that look like? Your perfect playoff team with coach involved as well.
Yeah. So again, I'm not sure that I'm going to necessarily call anybody out specifically, just because I don't want to ruffle any feathers, and it's not fair to certain people. But I think for me, the thing I would look for is intensity and passion, because I think that's something that you can't teach. And if your team has a hard time getting up for a state tournament game, or if your team kind of comes out of the gate and is a top seed or a high seed and thinks, every game's going to be a cakewalk, that to me would be a non-starter as a coach. You've got to care. I was talking to the Harrison coach, Mike Rusick, yesterday after the Hudson County final. They played well against St. Peter's. They lost 2-0. And he said to me, Jake, the only month we have to be undefeated in is November. And I thought that was great, because
I love that. Love that. Stealing that.
If you lose in October,
stealing that.
You still practice the next day. You may still have a game the next day. If you lose in November, there's no guarantee. And so, I think that notion of guys internalizing that. And listen, it's easy. And again, coaches always say it's just another game. But I think recognizing the stakes and harnessing that, channeling that, I think having guys who are able to internalize it the right way, I think is definitely important. So I think those things, listen, talent, you can teach kids fundamentals and get them more technical. But I think for me, if I was a coach, I would look more for a lot of the intangible stuff. So,
no, I'm just curious, because I heard you talk about it and you were covering a whole bunch of different conferences. If you were going to give me a few of those, and specifically, with Matt coaching BCSL, me and the Shore, what would you say the styles that you see are, and how do you think those styles might play out in the state tournament, kind of if they clash with one another?
Yeah, so I mean, it's tough. Again, if you, grew up in North Jersey, Kearney is the standard, and Kearney loves to possess, and that is what they do. They keep the ball on the floor, they take a bunch of touches, and it works for them. There's a reason they're incredibly successful. If you look at, other teams around the state, obviously, listen, Colts Neck's got a great striker in, Moore brother. And it's, sometimes it's teams being the sum of their parts. Sometimes it's teams being just a collection of guys where, hey, maybe you don't have a 25-goal scorer, but you have a bunch of guys who have 8 or 9 goals. And in some levels, and in some ways, I think that almost makes you more dangerous, because, if you take away one guy and you man mark one guy, to me, it's all about the supporting cast. And, a kid, yeah, he might be able to take over a game, but let's say you do shut him down. Well, if they don't have anything around that kid, then it's going to be a lot harder to win. I think last year of Southern, the run they went on, Aiden Donnelly was a monster, and he was our state player of the year for a reason. I mean, he scored every big goal for them, scored twice in the state final against Scotch Plains, scored against Shawnee, scored against all these good teams. And, he was a kid where it didn't matter if you tried to double team him or man mark him, he was going to find a way. And I think there are a lot of players like that, but there are a lot of teams too where it's, a matter of finding that balance and saying, hey, if we shut this kid down, who else is going to step up? And I think that's what's great about soccer, and that's what's great about the postseason in high school sports, is it makes heroes out of a lot of kids who might not be otherwise. And so I think that, to me, is what makes this so special and, so great to watch. And like I said, the games get super intense. So, again, I think in terms of styles that work well, it's, it's if you can do something a little bit different, because like I said, a lot of teams play similar enough ways that you know what to expect. And it can kind of be a double-edged sword, I guess, because, they might know what to expect from you, you might know what to expect from them. So if you can show them something different, if you can, disrupt things and be physical and, not be afraid to make tackles, I think that helps. If you're, organized defensively, Matt, to your point and what you said, and, obviously, like Princeton's a great example. They give up maybe one goal a game, if that. And it's, it's not about, I don't think, reinventing the wheel at this point of the year. It's, okay, if you have an identity and it's gotten you this far, how can you refine it and make it the best version of that, rather than trying to say, hey, if we're a team that likes to play direct and over the top, well, is it reasonable to suddenly become, a possession team or, one of these super defensive teams that parks the bus? Like, you need to know your identity at this point in the season and refine that and be the best version of that.
I love you brought up man marking. Yeah, we man marked Sean and Kyle Moore last year, and they were running ball boy within the first 15 minutes because we were down 5-0.
Yeah, man marking is a double-edged sword there.
And then you said too, with like being a hero, like we were just talking like short conference final, that Middletown South goalie is an absolute hero. Now for PK's clean sheet against one of the best teams in the state, and what brought Middletown South their first title since '88. So that's awesome.
First ever.
Yeah, that's right, first ever. I was thinking that was Manalapan's girls were the first since '88.
That's wild. Yeah,
so, that's awesome.
Rich was happy. He was pretty pumped up about that one. So my old man's the AD over there. He's like, yeah, we scrimmaged him. I was like, we held with him. So I'm like, all right, maybe we got a shot here.
So by default.
Yeah. So ipso facto, no, they still won. But so Jake, I know you're treading a fine line here. I know you don't want to wake up tomorrow with like 30 emails from moms and dads saying, oh, why didn't you mention my team? I get that. But one thing we talk about, and me and Fed having coached together, we always talk about like winning in the parking lot, and just like how if you the way you present yourself getting off the bus, the way you present yourself in warm-ups, like the way that looks sends a message and sets the tone for how you're going to play. And I think states, it's even more important. If you have every team's kind of positioning themselves and trying to eyeing each other up. But if you have that, like that, you're locked in, or you have a particular ritual or something like that, I think that goes a long way in helping you kind of set a tone and kind of tell the other team what to expect for the match. You've traveled obviously like all over the place. Is there any like specific games, you don't have to mention like the teams, but like where you're like, this team, I could tell from the jump, like they've got like there's something about this, you can feel it? Or is there any like traditions or warm-ups or stuff like that you're like, wow, that's impressive, like definitely gets them in? I know no one's doing like the New Zealand haka or something like that, but like something along those lines,
Yeah, I mean, listen, like for me, I always pay attention. I always watch both teams warm up, and to me, like I always pay attention to the passing drills and like the one touches, and I'm like, okay, like how crisp are these guys, in that realm, and what, how do they kind of disrupt play? Obviously a lot of teams will do like these scrimmages where it's 5-on-5 or 7-on-7, whatever it is, and where pennies. And, like how you compete against your friends, like, are you going to go all out in, your little 10-minute scrimmage before practice? I mean, I get not wanting to get hurt, but like, it's how do you, if you take that just as seriously as you take the game, like things will probably bode well for you. Again, I think the teams that, do some semblance of, I'm not going to say like super like high level team bonding, because I don't know how much team bonding you can do in 20 minutes warming up before the game, but like you can just tell when a team is connected, when a team is sort of firing on all cylinders. And when like, or one of my favorite things to watch too is, if a team has a great striker and a team has a good goalie, like watching those two guys go at it in practice, and guys ripping shots left and right, like that is a way to get locked in. So again, like there are great traditions all over the place. I'm not gonna necessarily single anybody out one way or another, but again, I think it's like fitness is another big thing that coaches talk about. Some teams almost do like a football style walkthrough. Some teams do go full out for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time during warm-ups. So I think there are a lot of different ways to be successful. But Matt, to your point about winning in the parking lot, it's like, yeah, okay, are you coming off the bus together? Is it do you have, your senior captain carrying the Gatorade jug? Do you have your, or is it like, hey, your freshman team's carrying the balls? Like, stuff like that I think is, sort of indicative of the style of program and, what the values are, that I think that's where you kind of get a sense of that stuff.
Yeah, like definitely we've talked about like games like where we just like you kind of have that sense of just you feel that energy getting locked in. I think that's one of the hardest things to do, especially with high school kids, and you have so much of a range of emotion. I mean, you got my girlfriend broke up with me, or I have my driver's test tomorrow, or I didn't get enough sleep last night, and you got more serious issues, and you have a mix, and it's like getting everybody on that same page is just so difficult. And we've had a couple games. It's almost like a flow state where I'm like, I can't see us, and I'm not like always like that, like we're gonna win or we're gonna lose. I'm like, there's games where you just walk in and you just feel it, and that's one of those things like I just don't know how to bottle that. I think some teams do. I think you see some of those great teams like you're saying, but it's just hard to get so many guys to do the exact same thing and get that energy.
And I think part of it too, in my experience from what I've seen, is sometimes the best way to approach it, from coaches I've talked to, from my reporting, is, and I'm not saying this to offend anybody, but is to almost think like you're playing with house money in a way, especially if you're a double-digit seed in a state tournament or in the short conference tournament or whatever it might be, play like you have nothing to lose, because, like, I'm not trying to say what's the worst thing that can happen in November, because obviously the worst thing that can happen is your
the worst
season
thing that can happen in November.
but
Highland Park,
if you play, I think if you play that way and, you approach it of like, what, hey, maybe we will shock the world. Like you said, Matt, it's like, we're 14 to 18-year-old kids. They're a team of 14 to 18-year-old kids. Like, who knows what's going to happen? So I think,
the Hoosiers. Yeah,
exactly. Like you talk about bottling it up. Like, I think internalizing that of like, hey, like, so what if we're an underdog? Like, a seed's just a number. Like, let's go out and prove people wrong. Like, I think that's just as important too.
Yeah, and the current system, it's you can have across the board, depth at, even going down to the 16s, because there's so many teams that are just like, I know for us in Central Jersey Group 3, like, there's so many teams with 10, 11 wins, that are lower, there's still home games, but lower seeds in there, where we have Colts Neck and, Middletown South now. I feel like I like the system personally. I like the way it works. I think it does work the way it's, I know other sports complain about their systems. I think we do get the number one seed for the most part, where do they need to be across the board. But it just, I feel like the soccer in New Jersey just gives so many opportunities for those upsets, and just the depth of talent we have here.
It seems like every year, I'm writing something about, a double-digit seed who's through to a section semi, or, an 8 seed who, made a section final. And I think that's great. For me, I think it shows that there's a lot of parity. Mm-hmm. If a section semifinal is the top 4 seeds, great. That means, like you said, Matt, the system's working how it's supposed to. But, I find it sometimes almost more compelling when, there are upsets. So.
Yeah, and I don't think it's like anything wrong. Again, people a little more versed in it with me. I'm not a math guy. Fed knows that. But like, I just feel like I'm like, you're generally based on your wins, you're kind of where you're at. But the depth of talent is just is it the parity is there because I know we had upsets in the BCS Central Jersey Group 3 last year. Some crazy stuff. I know Long Branch made a great run there. I just really do feel like it's the state tournament for soccer, boys soccer is just like it is where it needs to be and is exciting. And again, maybe people have other opinions, but I'm excited to get it started.
Yeah, and Jake, I'm sure you know this too. Is we'll talk about it in a few. Is like Central 4 every single year. Like I was doing the math one year. Like the average seed playing in the CJ4 final was like a 8-3. Like I was at West Windsor South my first year. We were an 8 seed playing a home semifinal game. The 16 seed North Brunswick or Sayreville beat the 1 seed North Brunswick, and then Howell was a 13 seed. They had taken out Princeton, and then Howell ended up beating us. Howell was a 13 seed playing against Freehold Township in the final. It's every year, I always look at Central Jersey 4, and it's like, what team is going to come out of absolutely nowhere this year? Because there's always at least 1 or 2 double-digit seeds in that semifinal.
And again, I'm sure we'll talk about this. I mean, the other thing too is, you guys, when you were in the Shore Conference and everything like that, the Shore doesn't play home and homes. Like Matt, I know in the CVC you guys do, the Big North does, the NJIC does. Basically every conference in the state, except for the Super Essex Conference and the Shore Conference, don't play divisional home and home games. So, if you're like the classic example I use is in North 1 Group 1, where I'm from, Emerson and Waldwick are in the same division. Usually they'll play each other twice. They'll see each other in the county tournament, and they're in the same state tournament bracket.
I feel like that's the only team I've ever seen Emerson Borough play. Like I've never seen them play. Like, but when I go on NJ.com and it's like I'm going through the scores, I'm like, oh, Emerson Borough is playing Waldwick again. That's crazy.
Exactly. And to your point about the upsets, Sean, like I think if there's familiarity with teams, I think it can be a benefit because you know what to expect, but they also know what to expect from you. So if you're trying to beat a team for the 3rd time this year or something like that, like I think that's where you see a lot of maybe some of the upsets start to trickle in and things. So I that part of it to me as a coach, I don't know if frustrating would be the right word, but again, it's like if you're trying to beat a team for the 3rd or 4th time this year, it's like at some point something's got to give. So
yeah, that was us going up against my good friend Justin Faust at Northern. They had our number of the first 2 games, and we got into the playoffs, and it's just like the playoffs is such a different animal that it's like, and again, being team 3, you won. It's like what else can they throw? You kind of the familiarity is great. Like I feel with in the BCSL the doubles and stuff like that, and all the summer stuff. Like we used to do these really elaborate scouting reports, and it's like I just do it by word of mouth. I'm like, yo, this is what we know, right? And like everyone knows. It's kind of like you do play each other so many times, and New Jersey being such a small state, so tight knit, they're like, yeah, there is so much overlap. It's crazy.
Yeah, like look, I told my boys we're playing the Borough. We've got Brick Memorial.
Wait, do you? Do you have Brick Memorial?
Yes, I think I
We're sure now.
Brick Memorial.
Can we confirm that?
Sure now.
I believe that's the case. Yeah.
But
wild day.
So I took over at Colts Neck for boys lacrosse, and last year we had to play Brick Memorial.
Oh, big reveal on the pod. Big reveal on the pod. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, right. We played Brick Memorial 3 times, lost by 1 each time. And I told the boys from Borough, I'm like, guys, if we go to Brick Memorial and lose by 1 again, I'm like, I can't do it. I can't handle it.
I'm emotionally not ready for that.
I am not emotionally ready to go back to Veterans Memorial Field and lose by 1 again. Like, please, let's go out there and make something happen.
So for our normal listeners on the World Class Coaching Podcast, if you're here for Coach Carroll's drill of the day, you can skip this part because we're going to go into our rundown of the New Jersey State playoffs. But if you are a casual listener or you're a New Jersey coach or you just, hey, I want to learn more about New Jersey soccer, feel free to join in on our preview here. But we're going to go into talking about the state of New Jersey soccer in the playoffs for about the next hour here. So if you are looking for Coach Carroll's drill, feel free to skip past this part and get to the end. But otherwise, let's get into it.
So Jake, let's do this. Let's run through. I know we can spend all day talking about the sections. Your group ones, group twos, group threes, group fours, your non-publics. Who you liking? Who do you see? Why don't we start with the little guys in group one? So just some context for our listeners who aren't from New Jersey. So how we do it for states, conferences competitive. Like you have your divisions. Like Matt is in the top division of the BCSL. He's in the most competitive with Delran, Northern Burlington, Cinnaminson.
Bordentown
me
next
at Freehold, Bordentown. Me in the Shore. We're in B North. So it's like you have your northern, your central, your southern parts because Jersey Shore goes all the way as far north as Middletown and all the way down south as Barnegat. So you're grouped by your sections. So we're in the northern part of the Shore in the B division, which is, like the second division. A North, Shore A North is probably the most competitive, most impossible division in the entire state. So, but then when it comes no bias at all. But when it comes to the sectional and state title tournament, your group one is your smallest schools, usually under 500 students. Then group two is under 1,000. Group three is under 1,500, and group four is somewhere around like the 2,000s. Those are all the publics. Then the privates are off in their own section too. So that's just a little bit of context for our listeners who aren't from New Jersey. So Jake, your little guys, group ones, who you seeing this year? Who do you like?
Yeah, so, again, I think we'll start north and work our way south, so again.
Sorry, one thing also is there's two north sections, there's a central and a south. You win your sectional, and then it goes central versus south, north and north, and that's how you get to the final, the semifinals, and then the finals of the tournament. Sorry, Jake.
No, all good. So again, I think in group one, it's, I feel like it's a lot of the same teams that we write about kind of year after year. Haddon Township in South Jersey is always seemingly in, the South or Central representative in the Group 1 final, although a few years ago it was Brearley when they played Shore.
Brearley. They got us.
And again, I think Shore Regional is always good. And again, they're somebody who, they're a Group 1 school in a section with a lot of Group 2, Group 3, Group 4s. So, they're a team that's used to playing schools that are 2-3 times their size.
He's going to say Highland Park. He's just going to name all the schools we've lost to in big games.
Highland Park. Ugh. But that was incredible. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. Go on, Jake.
So I think you can't sleep on them. I think Del Val in Central Group 1, again, playing in the Skyline Conference and, playing teams like Bernards and, Voorhees that just won its first ever 100 and more in Sussex title, playing 100 in Central close. I think they're a team certainly that going on a run in that section wouldn't surprise me. And again, Manville's the top seed. And they're the top seed for a reason. They only have 4 losses on the year. They've got 2 kids with double-digit goals. They've played, Boundbrook, who's in the section already, and, split with them. They've played some other teams in other sections that are high seeds and, managed to win those games.
Finally, a team that we actually had a good game against. Thank you. Shout out to my boy Kenneth Eccles over there. Good job.
I think Group 1, you'll see a lot of parity, in North 1, actually Middlesex, I know, has had a good year. Asbury Park's got a couple of good scorers.
Right back at it. Both teams we've lost to in the games. It's incredible.
Asbury has grown a lot. We played Asbury last year in the Coaches Cup, and we were like, this team is going to be an issue. And, that's a team, when I was looking at seedings, I'm like, yeah, if I was in Central 1, try to stay away from Asbury Park because, they've got a nice little run going. I forget who the coach is over there now, but he's been doing a good job with those guys.
Yeah, and you look at, Matt, you made the point of, you see a lot of teams with maybe only 10 or 11 wins that are, a higher seed. Or, if we look at North 1 Group 1, Emerson is 10-9-1 this year, and they're the top seed for basically the second time ever in program history. And part of it's because, they play in, Sean, you mentioned how, they tier divisions. So the NJIC started to tier its divisions this year, and they went 4-5-1 in their division, which was the top division in the NJIC. So, their record, they might be better than their record. And, I think you're going to see a lot of that in a lot of these brackets of teams that are better than their record, but because of the schedules they've played and everything, now you'll finally start to get a chance to see them prove that. So I think Emerson, again, Waldwick is always a tough out and, always seemingly in a state final. I mean, I think they've won, 5 state finals in the last 9 years or something like some crazy clip. So, I think they're always tough. In North 2, Wallington has a couple, double-digit goal scorers, including like a 25-goal scorer. But, they're also in a section with Verona and Glen Ridge. And again, like Verona and Glen Ridge are out here playing Seton Hall Prep and West Orange and St. Benedict's and all these teams. So, I think that's, again, where you'll start to see, like, okay, I think Verona made the section final last year as a 13 seed. They're a 5 seed this year. But, seeing them potentially make a final, or, New Providence has a bunch of, 20-goal scorers. They're the 3 seed, so seeing them make a run. So I think Group 1 is maybe where you tend to see more of the upsets than in some of the other sections, not to say it can't happen. And then, again, like in the South, Haddon Township is always tough. And, they have some big wins. They beat Haddonfield. They beat West Eptford. They beat Delran. They beat Sterling, who won a state title last year. So, I think no matter where you look in Group 1, there are teams that, can spring an upset here or there. And again, Palmyra, I know, is a 13 seed. Like, they're always a tough out. They always seem to find a way. I'm just looking at some of these brackets now.
Papenburg always sandbags.
Yeah, Pap always find Pap.
I don't know, not our best. We'll see. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yo, they still have you, Pap. So, and then he beat us 1-0 this year. I'm like, oh, no way, Pap. You weren't going to be great.
Yeah, Papenburg
every
does
time.
a great job of Palmyra.
Fantastic.
So yeah, I think Group 1 there tends to be a lot of variability, which is great and exciting. So yeah, and then Group 2, if we want to just move right along,
yeah, perfect. That's awesome.
To me, I think Central Group 2 is one of the best brackets. I think a lot of the Central Jersey brackets this year are really tough, like Central 2, Central 3.
I don't know who reorganized states last year, but Central 2 is an absolute war zone.
Delran going from South Jersey to Central, that was a big change. Cinnaminstons in Central 2 also, I know they were in South Jersey for a long time. But even, we look at some of these first round matchups, again, it's Wall and Ocean Township. Wall's an 11 seed, but, Gary Lindstrom just won his 300th game at Wall, 5th shore conference coach ever to do that. It's hard to bet against a guy like that with a pedigree like that. But Ocean Township, Tom Riley, legend, they're a, perennial power too. You look at Rumson has a great goalie who I've seen a few times, made some great saves. And Bordentown is the top seed. Mike Brennan comes back after 7-8 years away, and it seems like they're, I think, 15-2, something like that. So clearly they haven't really missed a beat.
They got us. Brennan, Zablo did a fantastic. Jason Zablo did a fantastic job. One of my really good friends at Bordentown for a long time, and he moves on. He becomes the AD over there. I'm like, oh, cool. Let's get some high school kid that doesn't know what he's doing for a couple of years. He just graduated. All right, here we go. No, it's Mike Brennan again. Great. All right.
Yeah, of course they got to bring in the coach who won a section title and everything. Again, I think a team to watch in that section always again. Robbinsville, they're only a couple years removed from a 20-win season where, they made a state final and lost to Garfield. And again, when they went from Group 3 to Group 2 last year, I think that sent off a lot of people's, I'm not going to say alarm bells, but that caught a lot of people's attention to where you're like, oh, wow, you've got a team that was a, state finalist in one group moving down this year. That's always going to, intrigue people. So,
yeah, Jeff Fisher does a really good job with Robbinsville. Just sprang up out of nowhere. They were a consistent 500 level team, and out of nowhere, with Bora Turker just went bang and absolutely jumped on the scene. And, they kind of like the same thing last year. After last year is, they lost Bora. They lost a lot of their guys. They went on, ended up going D1, and everyone's like, oh, okay, those guys are all gone, but those guys just figured out how to win and how to do it. So
yeah. I mean, we had them this
Robbinsville
year.
Will definitely be interesting to watch too.
We had them this year, and again, I think that's like winning begets winning. Like if you have programs that have that it's easy to say like, well, if you have won it before, it's easy to win again. But like that's it. Like knowing how to win and knowing what it takes. To track back to our earlier conversations, I feel like Robbinsville playing them this year, like that's a team that just like we know how to win. It's not always gonna be pretty if as clear cut as it has been in the years past. But yeah, definitely shout out to Fisher. Did a great job over there.
Yeah, no, and again, like, you look in that bracket too, like, Holmdale's a 5 seed despite graduating a kid in Stepan Kapranoff who's playing at Columbia.
Jeez, we're still talking about Central too? Holy crap.
I'm moving on, don't worry.
No, but that's like the point.
No, everyone's been yelling at us for too short.
Yeah, no, but that's like, everyone's like, you guys don't talk enough. I'm like, okay. But
yeah,
no,
you look at a team
Central
like that
is
graduates, a marquee scorer, and they're still a 5 seed in the state tournament, a year later. Like, to your point, Matt, like some programs just have that tradition and that proof of concept baked into them to where, they don't know anything else. And in South Group 2, this year, obviously Sterling, made its run to its first state title in like 30-something years. This year, they're a 3 seed this year, so certainly can't overlook them. Haddonfield, obviously, with Joe Falana, won all those games and all those state titles. But even, you look at a team like Haddon Heights. I mean, Jeff Epright's won a bunch of games down there, and
great dude, Jeff.
They're just programs that, come November, seem to always find a way, and. I think like Seneca's had a great year this year. Lindenwald has had a great year this year.
We
so I think
Seneca, they were impressive.
So, I think you're starting to see, new faces emerge there too, rather than, the same old. And, even in, like North 1 Group 2, again, up where I'm from, Glen Rock won the section last year. They knocked off Ramsey, who had won the section like the previous 3 or 4 years. So that, that's a great story. Manchester Regional, who's the 5 seed in that section, has won 15 games this year. It's their most wins in like the last 15 or 20 years as a program. So, it's like West Milford last year made its deepest postseason run ever. They're a 3 seed. Mawas, went from a winless team like 4 years ago to a 2 seed in the state tournament. So I think, there's a lot of parity in that section to me. Like when I look at that section, I'm like, okay, a 10 seed or, a 12 seed making a run to the semis, it wouldn't shock me at all. And then, if we look at North 2 Group 2, obviously Harrison is Harrison. They made the state final last year, lost in a heartbreaker in overtime to Sterling. But again, like that's one of these programs that seemingly always finds a way. Bernard's, same thing. But listen, Hackettstown is the 7th seed. They've got a kid in Ibrahim Ba who's a 25, 30 goal scorer, leads the HWS area. Madison this year for me was one of the biggest surprise teams. They won 14 in a row last year going into the Morris County final. Lost to Del Barton and then made a sectional semi. This year they started like 14, 15 and 0. They beat Westfield, who's a perennial top 20 team. They tied Scotch Plains, who's a perennial top 20 team. And like they showed, last year wasn't a fluke. Now they just lost to Randolph 3-0 in the Morris County semis. But still, that's a team that's clearly been on the ascent and has clearly, figured itself out. Voorhees, who's the 4 seed in North 2, Group 2. Like I said, they just beat Hunterdon Central. I think it was 2-1 in overtime. Came back from down 1-0. First ever HWS title. Lyndhurst has, I think, the active career goals leader in Robert Dassler, who's got like 85 or 86 goals in his career. So, everywhere you look, there are strong teams, strong kids. So, I think a lot of these brackets, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I don't want to talk the whole time, so I'll...
Well, I love hearing it. Feels like the old days
with
Brian, but I wanted to say, like, for those, like, you can't see it right now, but, like he's just rattling these facts off. Like he's just like he's not like got a list here. He's just like, yeah, I just remember this stuff. Like I think about it. I'm like, I haven't
Jake,
heard of half these
going.
towns. I'm like, all right, man. And I live and breathe it, and I'm in it, and like I'm like, yo, I don't know. That's crazy. I'm thinking about like what number is my striker right now. Like, no, very impressive. I want to know at home, like you know, covering the state with 2 people and know all this stuff. You know, I think it's, you know, people that get praise, they're like, yeah. People that don't, you know, there's always someone kind of, you know, they want to hear their kid's name and stuff like that. But to watch you do this is like, I just want everyone to know it's very impressive. No, but yeah, this is what, again, like when we listened to Brian back in the day, like this is what it was. I know we were trying to look, you know, for a bigger, you know, audience beyond just New Jersey, but for us New Jersey guys, like keep going, dude. We love it.
No, I appreciate that. So yeah.
So before you continue and we get ready for Group 3, so
You're gonna pick
tell us
Burlington
your
Township,
Central
and then-
Group 3 preview and how Freehold Borough is going to play Burlington Township in the Central 3 final.
Oh, I didn't realize you guys were on opposite sides of the bracket. Okay, nice. A little double-digit final. I would take that.
We think. We're
I'm
pretty
telling you
sure.
right now, Central 3, fasten your seatbelts. There's Freehold Borough, we're a 10-win, 12 seed. Like there's a lot of very strong competitive teams. Like looking at those matchups, you know, obviously Colts Neck, Sean Moore, and then you have Middletown South who just beat Colts Neck in the Shore final. But then
I'm just glad there's not 2 of them ananymore. When they had 2 of them, it was that was nuts.
Well, and even
Trust me,
you
I
look at
know all
Long
about
Branch.
it.
Long Branch is the defending section champ, and they're a 7 seed.
yeah, it's crazy.
And they've got to go and play Hopewell Valley. And, you know, Ed Gola is the Don of the CVC. He's been there for forever. Hopewell Valley is always such an impressive program. You know, they've got one of the top goalies in the CVC. They actually, even though they lost tonight, they were beating Princeton at halftime in the CVC semis. And they're a team, like, you know, earlier, I think we were talking about, you know, do you have that stud goalie you could step up? Hopewell's got one. So, you know, can't sleep on Hopewell. You know, Lawrence and Steiner are going to play each other for the 3rd time this year. You know, in the CVC, like there's so many good matchups that's going to be such a good section to watch. Obviously, because we're in it, so obviously it's going to be fun to watch. But
No bias.
no bias. But you know, Justin Foss, Northern Burlington, he always does such a good job with that program. It's been building it up for a while.
And they're only
Yeah,
juniors.
I mean,
All
to
those
me,
kids are
like
only juniors.
the team that caught my attention is West Hampton Tech. You know, is
Yes.
a 4th seed
Yeah,
in
Shane.
that section.
The boy Shane over
And,
there.
and I know,
Sure.
I know Wills and O's got 25 goals for them or something like that, and you know
He's
they have a
legit.
couple of other standout offensive players. And like, what a great story that a program like that I'm sure if you ask most people have never heard of is, you know, a top 4 seed and guaranteed a home game in the state tournament. Like that's great. And even, you know, Matt, the team that you guys are playing, Brick Township, you know, they won their first division title this year. We think maybe ever, certainly in like the last 2 decades.
The NJ.com era, yeah.
We kept them out of states last year. We played them in the last regular season game. Winner went to states. We kept them out, and now they're incredible this year. They're having a great year.
Yeah, and again, like I think they've won like the most games they have in, you know, over a decade. They're in the state tournament for the first time in years, and you know, I think that to me is what makes this stuff great. You know, you see what it means to all these programs, and you know, it sort of signifies, you know, for some of these teams, like, hey, like we've arrived. You know, we're not just an easy win on a team schedule anymore. And, you know, there are certainly going to be no easy wins, I think, in this bracket. You know, Brook Memorial obviously has had a great year, too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they beat Southern and they beat some other teams. You know, they beat
Township. They beat Township. We've got them. They're going to be, you know, not tooting our own horn, but, you know, Parsh has the boys. We're playing some really, really good soccer right now. But, yeah, Brook Memorial's, you know, they're excellent on set pieces. They have a stud striker up top. And then his twin brother is the center back.
His name's Striker. You know, that's impressive.
They've got the pieces to make some runs.
Shout out him.
Yeah, and again, like, you know, you look at a team like, you know, Mid-South and the job that Dan Averso's done. You know, I think they didn't. I think they conceded 1 goal the entire Shore Conference tournament, and if you include the pool play games, I think then that number goes up to like 3 goals or something crazy like that, which, I talked about knowing your identity before. Okay, if you're a defensive-minded team, the other part of it is, knowing your identity is great, but if you face adversity and you're in a position you haven't been in before, how do you handle it? And so if you're one of these teams like Mid-South, Tenafly up by me has conceded, I think, 7 goals all year. Chatham's conceded like 6 goals all year. And you suddenly find yourself down, a goal or two, like, how do you respond? And I think that's a big part of it too, is, preparing sort of for the unknown and the unexpected.
Yeah, and having that level of competition, I mean, that like for Milltown South, who's my pick if it's not us, because, no bias, but like for them, like you've already been battle tested, you've gone and won things, and you've won championships already. You've been in those like do or die games. Like having that experience, I feel like is so important going into it. Obviously, to be in that position, you're pretty damn good anyway. But to have that experience, win or lose, to be able to say like we've already done a do or die kind of thing, and have that simulation of what the state tournament's like, I think definitely is an advantage for teams that made those runs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it's proof of concept, and it's, not just the kids on the team now, but the youth programs, and the kids in town seeing, hey, what's possible if, you stay home and, what you can do here. So, I think that's a big part of it,
No one's jumped your Tuesday 3:45 game, unless you're like Kearney, but like then, yeah. I mean, it's the state playoffs and you're playing at night, or you're playing and it's like, hey, this game's going to be here. You're advertised a little bit. Yeah. Like that's where you definitely get the local kids out there running balls and stuff like that. That is, you try to do that every day, but like you said, like the season's just different than the postseason for sure.
Yeah, no, and again, like we talk about tough sections. Like the other tough section in my mind is North 1 Group 3. I mean, of the 16 teams in that bracket, 14 of them are over 500. So like when that's the case, and you're dealing with you've got. Like Dover's the 10 seed, like they're 12-5 this year. Wayne Hills is the 6, and they're just 9-8-1. So it just.
I went
goes,
to Wayne Valley, so but yeah, good for Hills, I guess.
No bias.
But no, it goes to show how tough and competitive some of these sections are. You look at a team like Ramapo. I mean. Evan Baumgarten's got the 5th most wins of any coach in New Jersey history.
That school's good at everything. They're good at everything.
Exactly. But, they haven't made it to a section final since 2016 or 17, and that just goes to show what a gauntlet that bracket is.
Yeah.
So, I think they're always a team to watch. I've seen Randolph twice this year. I think Randolph's very impressive. They're super organized defensively. They have a goalie who's, got an incredible wingspan in Gavin Vishengrad. And again, like, when it comes down to it, Matt, like you said, would you rather have a star striker this time of year or a star goalie? Like, I think I would tend to maybe agree with you and, give the edge to a team with a great goalie. So, I think Randolph's certainly a team to watch in that section. But again, you look at teams like Morris Knowles. Morris Knowles has a great goalie too. They've been playing well. They have some big wins. Garfield's a 16 seed. Garfield gave Ramapo fits last year in the Bergen County final. It was a 1-0 game. Jordan Hunt scored the game-winning goal with like 5 minutes left for Ramapo. Montville, certainly, listen, Wayne Valley knocked off West Milford as the top seed in the Passaic County tournament this year. And, they're playing Northern. And, they're playing Northern Highlands. And, that's a 12-5 game that could easily be an 8-9 game, next year. So, I think a lot of these teams are better than their seeds, Old Tapan and Tenafly play in the same division. So this will be like the 3rd or 4th time that they're seeing each other. And that's a 14 versus 3. So, I think that's going to be a section to watch. And in, North 2 Group 3. And, the funny thing about how the state organizes its sections is, it's based on northing numbers, which I guess have to do, I think, with lines of latitude and longitude. So, like, mid-north.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. Because, that's Middletown North is in North 2, not Central, even though Mid-South is in Central.
Oh, I did not know that.
For lacrosse,
that's
the
wild.
Middletowns are northern. Dude, like, when I was coaching bowling, obviously not everyone's got a bowling team, but, like, we had schools like Salem would be in, like, Central 1 for girls bowling, because there was just nobody else when it came to the northern lines.
But it's
all...
that's so crazy. Like, All right.
Yeah.
The world's not flat. Maps are. All right. I hear you.
Yeah. But yeah, like, listen, again, Mid-North, I know they were down by their standards this year. They only have 5 wins. But again, they're a team, when they're playing Holmdel and Rumson and Manasquan and Ocean Township and all these teams, game in, game out, it's like, again, that's a team that's probably better than their record. And, again, Cranford's having a great year. Cranford just beat Westfield the other night. Cranford was close with Elizabeth. They beat New Providence, close with Scotch Plains. Like, that's the other thing too is, a lot of it is like margin of victory. If you're playing in a lot of 1-goal games throughout the season, the margins in the state tournament only get thinner and thinner because the teams are just better and better. So, if you're used to blowing teams out 3-0 and suddenly it's, 2-1, again, we talk about responding. It's like, how do you respond to a situation like that? So, like Rahway, which I think won the section last year, they're, again, a 6 seed this year. But, that's always a program that's tough. Mendham beat Delbarton this year for the first time since, like, 2009 or something like that, I think it was. They're in this section. Chatham, who just won its first Morris County title in 15 years, they're the 2 seed. They're an excellent team. I mean, I think I said they've conceded 6 goals all year, and their 3 losses are to Delbarton and Randolph, and that's it. And, again, they tied Madison, but then they avenged their losses to Delbarton and to Randolph. So, I think they've shown clearly that they're capable of rising to the occasion. Nutley has had a great year. They tied Seton Hall Prep. They tied Kearney. They have a pretty balanced offense as well. So, I think that'll help them. And then, again, it seems like all the good teams are in Group 3 because South Group 3 this year, especially with the emergence of Moorestown, I mean, they're, I think, a 2 or 3 loss team. Shawnee is a South Jersey, powerhouse every single year. And then, you look at the 2 Toms River schools. I mean, Toms River East has had a great year. I mean, they challenged CBA for the number 1 overall seed in the short conference tournament for a lot of the year. And, they have some good wins, obviously, like I said, Moorestown, again, they lost to Robbinsville, they lost to Shawnee, they lost to Ocean City, but it's like, when you look at who they've beaten, they beat Cherokee, they beat, Cinnaminson, they beat Haddonfield, Lenape, that's a good win. Clearly they've earned the top seed, Toms River East, again, beaten Brick Memorial and Lacey and TRN and all these teams, I think they're going to be a team to watch. Certainly, again, Toms River South, they have, like I said, a good freshman goalie. So I think they're a team in that section that could certainly go on a run. And then you look at, like the 10-7 in that one to me is intriguing. Again, like Lacey and Absegami. Lacey's under 500, but they have a great kid in Tanner Grzinski, who I think is that program's all-time leading goal scorer. And, Absegami, again, is playing teams like Washington Township and Notre Dame and, Seneca and all these good teams. So, yeah, they might be 10-6, but, a lot of these teams, it's kind of you underestimate them at your own peril. And again, like Ocean City, they have a first-year coach. They've been doing really well. So, I think maybe, pound for pound, team for team, based on just what I've seen in terms of results, in terms of stats and players, I think the Group 3 brackets are probably the toughest, especially like, North 1, Central, and South. And again, North 2 is not going to be a cakewalk either. But I think listen, if you like competitive games, it's a good year to be a Group 3 coach. If you were hoping to get an easy, an easy walk to a section title, then I think it's a bad year to be a Group 3 coach.
Which we both are.
Yes.
I'm
excited. So we'll see how it all goes. Well, we got Group 4 now?
Yeah. And then, right. So again, like in Group 4, again, you look at, like Central 4, to your point, Princeton is a 4 seed in that section. Like, Princeton's been in state finals the last few years. They've been in section finals. Like, their team is a 4 seed. Like, Monroe, is great, and they're having a great year. And they lost to St. Joe's Metuchen, Robbinsville, and Pingree, and like that's it. And they beat CBA.
You only lost to Pingree. Oh my God! Like such a tough.
Well, and they lost to Pingree by 1 in overtime, and like
right, exactly.
They beat CBA, they beat Westfield.
Write them off.
Yeah.
So again, like that's a great, like that semifinal right there could easily be a section final. And
they're always so impressive, Monroe.
Yeah, and again, like Marlboro this year, I know in the short conference again.
Hey, Ryan Morris, good dude.
Ryan Morris,
boy.
Again, like they've hovered around 500, but if you look, like they beat Manalapan 1-0, which is a good win for them. They beat Manalapan twice this year. They drew with Rumson Fairhaven 0-0. They only held Colts Neck to 1 goal in a 1-0 loss.
And Morris is making sure that those guys, like you were saying at the beginning of the episode, Jake, like Ryan is like, we are battle tested, Marlboro. They're always battle tested and ready to go by state time.
Yeah, and again, like you look at Herndon Central. They have a first-year coach this year, and they're the 2 seed, in that tournament. And I think a team like that, I would imagine is probably going to be pretty hungry coming off a loss in HWS, a tournament that they've dominated, for years. Like this is a chance at a get-right game for them. And again, like they've played Randolph, they played Pennington, they beat Shawnee, and they beat Pingree. So
they also have a really great video production crew. I do have to shout out them.
Yes,
I had to watch them a couple years back. They played South Hunterdon. They had it. I was like, this is quality production.
Yeah, for students, they do a great job.
I'm very interested to see what Hightstown's going to do. So Hightstown got in, where I teach at Hightstown. They got in because of the Freehold Township DQ. And last year, as a 16 seed, they got Princeton to PKs.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, George Wolkowitz has been there for a long time, and he when it's time to like buckle down and get results. So I'm not saying like, oh my God, this is a wild outfit again. Like Monroe's incredible. Like I'm probably rolling with Monroe, but don't be surprised if Hightstown keeps that game a little bit closer than people expect.
Yeah, no, and again, like in
no bias.
No bias.
And again, like if we look in South Group 4, like that's another section where it's like, okay, Washington Township, obviously, they had their run with Shane Snyder where they were winning, year after year. And
I've gotten lost in that school several times.
Oh, really?
They do the South Jersey voting there, and I would be like, I have no idea where I am. I don't know how to get out.
And again, like Ed McCusker, who's I think in his second year as coach there, he played there. So again, it's like, Matt, you mentioned like just the standard. It's like, when you have a guy who's an alum who's been on those teams and there's that continuity, I think clearly that's shown because, they're a top 20 team for us. They're the top seed in the section. And that's just one of those teams where it's like, yep, you're filling out your sectional bracket ahead of time and you're feeling like who's going to slot and where, and you're like, yeah, they're probably going to be a high seed. Cherokee, too. I mean, Cherokee the last few years has had a great goalie in Cole Butler. He was fringe, all-state for us the last few years. And again, like they're a team, they might not score a ton of goals, but they're also not conceding many. So, when that, they've given up 11 goals in, or 15 goals in 17 games. So, when that's the case, like, you don't always need to beat teams 3-0, So I think, them as the 2 seed, they have some big wins on their ledger too. And, they're going to be one of these teams that, again, like they just lost to St. Augustine in the Coaches Cup. Like they'll probably be eager to, get after it. Toms River North and Lenape, I think, is a great game in the first round. Toms River North, the 6 seed. Lenape's the 8. They actually played each other last year to open the season. Lenape won that game 3-2, and then they played each other in the state tournament in 2023 in a section semifinal, and Toms River North won that game. So again, there's history there. These two teams always play each other close. And Toms River North this year, they traveled all the way up here and played Kearney. They drew Southern, who, we'll talk about in a second, and obviously won a state title last year. They played Pingree, they played Notre Dame, they played Delran, they played, even, Marlboro and CBA and all these teams. So that's another team like Marlboro that's going to be battle tested.
And keep an eye on TR North because TR North has the magic of the Coaches Cup.
Yeah, that's
In
true.
the Shore, last year Long Branch was 0-8. And then Long Branch won a couple games. They got hot, got into the Coaches Cup, won the Coaches Cup, then went upset Colts Neck and went and won Central 3. So, usually with the Shore Coaches Cup, whoever comes out of that tournament a winner usually does something well. So, and obviously, like you're saying, TR North year in, year out is just a perennial power. So I'm actually very interested to see what they're going to do.
Yeah, no, and again, like I think Egg Harbor in that section is a team that, they might maybe get overlooked in the Cal because St. Augustine's in their division. But, I mean, listen, they've lost 3 times this year. 2 of the games were by 1 goal, and the losses were to St. Augustine and Shawnee, who were 2 of the top teams in South Jersey. And again, like they beat Sterling 4-0, who won a state title last year. They beat Lenape, who's in this bracket. They've beaten Ocean City twice, who's a high seed in its bracket. So I think they're definitely a team to keep an eye on. And again, to me, the interesting thing is always like when I'm clicking around on the stats and I see like, okay, a team scored like 50 goals and they have like 11, 12, 13 different goal scorers. Like that to me means, okay, you can kind of do damage from anywhere. And that sort of, I'm not going to say automatically gives you a leg up, but it definitely makes things tough to contend with.
I would say when I'm scouting and I see 3 double-digit goal scorers, you're like, all right, well, that's going to be a tough one. Like, having one, you're like, we can scheme, we can man mark, we can shift, we can do this, that. But, like, you're like, well, can't stop all 3 at the same time. I think that is definitely, you don't really know what you're getting into, but seeing that is definitely like a notch in their belt for sure.
And again, I think the other team not to sleep on in South 4 is Southern. They won the state title last year for the first time ever. They finished number 5 in the state last year after beating Scotch Plains. And they brought in a new coach this year in John Nicarlo, who all he did at Holmdel when he was the boys coach there is win state titles and have all state players. I mean, they finished number 1 in the state for us a few times. They finished undefeated. He was coach of the year for us. And he's shown like there isn't much of a drop off there. I mean, they're a 5 seed in the state tournament. They could easily go on a run. And
we had to go there for their I don't know if it was their senior night, but we had a night game there. Dude, the way that front 3 plays, they are so intense and so good. Southern at what they do. Like we hung with them for a little bit, but it was just like it was only a matter of time. So they're just the sheer amount of intensity, especially that front 3 played with. It's like, okay, like how long is it sustainable? So yeah, they were impressive.
And to that end, like the fact that they're doing that and the fact that they're winning and playing as well without the reigning state player of the year who scored 30 goals for them last year. I think that to me is the hallmark that, okay, clearly, this team hasn't lost much. And, if we go to the other sections in Group 4, like, North 2 Group 4, certainly, Scotch Plains is the top seed, another perennial soccer powerhouse. But, to me, a lot of the double-digit seeds in this section, I think in particular, are tough. You look at, like, the 14-3 game is Newark East Side against Westfield, 2 teams that are historically strong. Newark East Side's in a division with St. Benedict's, Montclair Kimberly, West Orange, and Seton Hall Prep. Like, there might not be many divisions better than that in the state. And they're coming into this tournament with, a sub 500 record, but, still some big wins, and playing in that, brutal division is only going to prepare them. And again, like they played Clifton, who's in North 1 Group 4. They played Union City, who, didn't make the tournament, but was having a great year. They played Columbia. So, I think that's a team where, you look at Westfield this year. Westfield's still great. And, they lost to Madison and they lost to Rumson. But then, they beat Elizabeth, they beat Princeton, they beat Summit. So, a lot of these teams, you can't just look at wins and losses. You can't just look at, margin of victory or who they've played. Like in the state tournament, funny things happen. Like even Watchung Hills, they're, again, I don't mean to keep harping on divisions that teams are in, but when Watchung Hills is, playing Pingree and, Hunterdon Central and Gill St. Bernard's twice and all these teams, like that's got to count for something.
Yeah, it totally makes a difference, 100%.
And again, like Bridgewater, Raritan, and Columbia, like again, Columbia with Gene Shizowich won all these titles. They haven't quite replicated that success since, but like, that'd be a great win for them. Bridgewater, Raritan's always a tough program. Columbia has a chance to really, make some noise and, I think surprise some people this year. They played, they shut out a Montclair team that had one of the best offenses in Essex County this year in the second round of the county tournament. So, I think that they're certainly a team to watch. And in North 1 Group 4, like that to me is a really tough section. I mean, you have West Orange, who's the top-ranked public school in the state for us, as the number 3 team in the state.
They're 18 and they have just been good forever.
Yeah,
even when I was in high school, I feel like they had the Gatorade National Player of the Year. Like 2 of the 4 years I was in high school.
Yeah, maybe Brian Hernandez could be.
I just like this every year is like, okay, like what nationally ranked star do they have now?
And again, like that, they're 18-1 coming in, and they only lost to St. Benedict's 2-1. And when we get to the non-publics, we'll talk about St. Benedict's and how they're maybe a little bit a class above. But like to play a team like that so close, like that's got to give them confidence. And they're playing teams from all over the state, so. And they also have one of the few, at least to my knowledge, one of the few public school kids in New Jersey who's committed to a Division I school. Their center back, Marcus Jackson's going to UCLA to play soccer. And he's certainly the highest profile commit among North Jersey public school kids. Maybe in the South there are some kids that I'm forgetting or not thinking of. But, when you have a kid, your center back's going to a Big Ten school, like, pretty hard to score, and
you might have a good chance of winning.
Yeah. But again, like, they'd face the winner of Clifton and Morristown, and Clifton's another program that's given West Orange fits over the years, and Kearney and Montclair are going to play each other in the quarters, and those are 2 teams that could easily make a section final in any given year. And Ridgewood, which won this section last year for the first time in like 30 years, is the 7 seed, and they take on Passaic, who had won 15 games in a row before they lost in the Passaic County final. So, I think this is another section where kind of everywhere you look, you can make an argument that, hey, this team's going to go on a run, this team's going to spring an upset here. So, I think, like, this year in particular, there's way more parity, I think, on the public school side than maybe there has been in years past. So,
Jake, before we wrap up, how about those non-public?
Yeah, so again, non-public A, I think St. Benedict's very clearly the team to beat. Year in, year out, they're always going to be, I think, a cut above. But you look at a team like St. Peter's, St. Peter's Prep tied them 1-1. And, Pingree was up 2-0. And then, Amadou Han, star striker for St. Benedict's, came back, scored a hat trick, put St. Benedict's right back in the game and made it 3-3 before Benedict's won that game in double overtime. So, I think even there, you see a team who's ranked number 1 nationally, and they've played some close games. And, if you're a non-public A coach, hopefully, maybe that encourages you. But also, come the state tournament, like, St. Benedict's is just on another level. I mean, if you look last year at their run to the state final, or to the state title, they didn't concede a goal the entire state tournament, which is crazy when you're playing Pingree,
non-public A, yeah,
Seton Hall Prep, and Bergen Catholic. Like,
that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so if they were to take their game to another level, like I imagine they will, that to me would not be a surprise at all. And if you see them, rattle off a similar shutout streak, I think that's a reasonable thing to expect there. But even, the bottom half of that bracket, Bergen Catholic's playing for its first Bergen County title in 6 years on Saturday. So, if they win that game and beat Ramapo, they'll come into the state tournament with some momentum. Del Barton's a young team this year, but those young kids have shown that they can play. Seton Hall Prep has been defensively one of the best teams around. So, I think that's, I think for as much as, St. Benedict's, I think, is the favorite there, there should still be definitely a lot of competitive games. And then non-public B, in the North, I think Montclair Kimberly and Gill St. Bernard's, two teams to beat by a pretty wide margin there, in my opinion, based on what I've seen and who they've played. MKA's got a goalie who's going to Harvard. So, clearly a smart guy, knows how to, read the field and, command a defense. So that always helps. But again, those are two teams that always play each other, whether it's in the Prep B tournament, whether it's in this tournament. And, they always play each other close. So, I think reasonable exception there is more of the same. We talk about the northern numbers before with Middletown North somehow being in North 2 and Mid-South and Central. In South Jersey, non-public, Pingree is the top seed. Now, I don't think anybody would contend that Pingree's in South Jersey. And I'm sure if you're...
Not by any means.
Where's
St. Peter's? Again, is St. Peter's still in South? Or they?
No, they used to be. They are no longer.
Like a year or two ago, not long ago, they were St. Peter's in Jersey City was a South Jersey non-public day.
What? No way.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, St. Peter's. Fish at Notre Dame, his first round matchup was St. Peter's.
What was the kid, Dougie? Basketball kid?
Yeah. They literally had to get on the bus from Jersey City because they were considered South Jersey because of the same thing. The way the lining and the districting everything was done based on northern and southern schools for non-public A. Yeah, St. Peter's in Jersey City, which for if you are not from New Jersey is literally right across from New York City. So it's North Jersey. There's no other way to go around it.
It's a hell of a home field advantage and 2-hour ride in traffic.
Yeah. And they were traveling all the way down to down the turnpike about an hour and a half to go play Notre Dame a couple of years ago.
Yeah. But yeah, so again, Pingree in that section, certainly as the top seed, it's hard to bet against them. But even that 4-5 matchup with Notre Dame and St. Joe's Metuchen. St. Joe's Metuchen is undefeated this year. Them and St. Benedict's are the only two remaining undefeated teams left in the entire state, I think. And again, Notre Dame has played tough. St. Joe's has some big wins. And again, St. Augustine's the 3, CBA is the 2. Two programs, again, that are always in the mix. They've played each other a bunch, so they'll probably meet in the semis. And, CBA this year, obviously made it back, didn't make it back to the Shore Conference Tournament final. They lost to Mid-South in the semis, but, they have some big wins on their ledger over Bergen Catholic. Thomas River East, they beat Coltsneck, TR North, Rumson, they've lost twice all year. And, when that's the case, St. Augustine, same thing. Their only loss is to an out-of-state school. They beat Del Barton. They beat Cherokee in the quarters of the South Jersey Coaches Cup. They won their conference tournament. So, they're a team, seemingly, that just always finds a way to win and make some noise. So, yeah, I think that bracket should be very wide open.
I know Fish very well. I think I was talking to Fish the other day, or at some point, he's been to 8 finals and hasn't gotten over the hump yet. But he's been grooming that Notre Dame team since they were freshmen and sophomores. They last year, just to get to Pingree, they had to beat Christian Brothers. They had to beat St. Augustine. Obviously Pingree's insanely impressive, was competing with St. Benedict's, but, Notre Dame will do good at that too, so.
And then South Non-Public B, Rani has, I think, the Shore Conference's leading goal scorer this year, and this kid, Eddie Magarini, who, I haven't seen, but again, when you're leading an entire conference in goals, I don't care who you play for, that's an impressive feat in and of itself. I think they are certainly a team to keep an eye on, and, what a story that would be, because, I'm checking now, they've never won a section title, so, to be a top seed and in that position to, make history like that, I think is a great thing. And, if you look at the 2 seed in that section, sorry, give me 1 second here, you look at the 2 seed in that section, again, Princeton Days in the CVC, and, they're under 500, but they're playing Lawrence and Princeton and Hopewell and Notre Dame. So again, they're one of these other teams that is way better than their record might indicate. So I think,
and always just so that you're going to play PDS, and you're banking on about 2 or 3 go off the goal line clearances. Like, if there's one thing PDS is, so they are so organized, they are so good at keeping the ball out of the back of their own net.
Yeah. So again, I think I'll. Sorry, give me 1 second.
I got to rip you apart, Jake. I mean, I'll give you all this credit, and then we were in the last final division. You Google something.
No,
made it the whole way.
I know. But yeah, no. So listen, overall, I think it's gonna be a great state tournament. It always is. Like we said, there are always upsets. It seems like in every bracket. So I'm sure I'm gonna, put out picks for games on Monday morning before all the games start.
Drop tier first, though. Drop tier first. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure, I'm sure they'll all be wrong by about 8 o'clock.
I can't wait for it. I'm just hearing all this stuff. I'm like, all right,
Yeah, I think it'll all be fun. And again, like having you on here, Jake, with NJ.com and following along with all this stuff. I hope everybody checks it out and looks at all that stuff. Seeing all these different teams and kind of how the season goes out, and you watch it, and you can kind of be, kind of aloof. I check the scores all here and there, but like seeing these teams we've seen all year and go through the playoffs and watching, knock each other off, it's gonna be exciting. And again, like you said, I think it's, a part of you is the reporter, and you're saying these things, and you want to be positive, but I don't think it's crazy to say all these games are gonna be tight. It's gonna be really a really exciting November.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's the best time of the year for a reason. Now, this is maybe a discussion for another day, but also in the state tournament, unlike in the regular season, games can go to penalty kicks, and I know some coaches hate penalty kicks. I know some coaches love penalty kicks. So
don't turn your back. Coach's advice: tell your kid, do not turn your back. They should go.
So I'm sure we'll get a couple of games that are decided by a shootout too. So.
No, it's gonna be awesome.
Exciting.
It's gonna be awesome. I'm excited. We got to get over these couple next days. Where it's just gonna be pouring. We're gonna lose games here and there, but you got Halloween and then showtime. So really excited about it. I know you're gonna pick us. Not a big deal. Really appreciate that ahead of the time. But whatever chips lie. Yeah. Well, we'll win the final. That's the final. Love what you guys do. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. And go
thank
State.
you, Jake.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Tuesday yet. I just can't wait to watch it all unfurl and everything like that. So and be a part of it.
If there are any coaches or ADs who listen to this, please play your games early on Tuesday so that we can get out to cover them. If there's no school, it's election day. Play your games at 2 o'clock.
We're already playing at 5.
I'll write a message for Memorial.
We're already later. Oh man, yeah, no, I'm. This is I tell the kids all the time, this is it. We don't even the way the weather is in Jersey now. We don't even get heavy jackets anymore. We get light jackets. I'm but once you get to the playoffs, the leaves start falling. It's it's cold out. It just feels like real soccer. It's 105 degrees. You're all right, this is we're not there yet. Once those leaves start falling, it's everyone's got a hoodie on. This is when it really starts. And yeah, and I love, again, NJ.com does fantastic job. I do want you to bring back the app. I don't know if you guys remember, you had an app a while back.
Oh, okay.
And I could get alerts. I would text Brian every year. I'm like, Brian, you got to bring it back. And it was ESPN, but just for NJ, NJ.com boys soccer. And my phone just blah, blah, blah. I'm just following all of it. But yeah, just watching obviously, room for Burlington Township here. But from the other divisions and stuff like that, just following along and being able to see kind of everything pop up. And seeing some of the teams you've seen results throughout the year, and you're all right, I know of them, or they have a good coffee shop over there. I've been there. Or Glen Ridge, I took my my licenses there in a parking lot in the snow. So just seeing all that stuff and kind of making it beyond soccer, just it being about New Jersey and seeing New Jersey and the different cultural things and the way different towns operate and stuff like that. It just makes you feel watching you guys cover it all. It makes you feel very NJ proud for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's right, baby. Jersey strong.
Absolutely.
We don't pump our own gas.
Yep. Always.
Hey, everybody! Before we get into the interview with Jake, he's going to talk about the high school playoffs that are coming up here in New Jersey, and I'm sure in other parts of north of the United States. And when you get to the playoffs, you have a season where you've been playing since August. Players are physically tired, they're mentally tired. Things are starting to drag, and you have to kind of keep things fresh. And I wanted to go over with you guys a drill, since Jake's not really going to have one since he's not a coach. For you guys to be able to apply to your sessions going forward, whether you're in the playoffs, whether you want to use this, whenever. But I've really been enjoying it. As kind of a way, to get the players thinking, get the players challenging them a little bit, finding solutions to problems. So what we've been doing is we've been setting up grid squares of coaching sticks, about 10 by 10, and then we put a goalie in the middle of them. We cut the field about in half. We at Bergen Township have anywhere about like 30 players coming up for varsity, between varsity and JV call-ups. So what we do is we split the teams in half. We have 3 goalies, 3 boxes, and spread them out in kind of different places. And the way you score points is by being able to complete passes through these grids. And we play with 2 balls. So you have a player going essentially 1v1 with the keeper, with the defender trying to stop them, trying to slot a pass through these boxes. What we really found is it really helps the players get that semblance of, okay, we want to drive to these places. We want to find the ones where we have a numerical advantage. When we get there, we want to use our combination play to unlock the keeper, unlock the defense, and find these easy passes. We'll get as many as we can, and then we'll find a new box to go to once we lose that numerical advantage when defenders are able to get in. At first, I think a lot of the players it was kind of chaos. I heard several players go, I don't know what's going on. It creates that, especially with the 2 balls in play. But once they settled down, it was about problem solving. It was about attacking, areas of the field where we had numerical advantages. And I think they really enjoyed it. And then when we leveled it up, what we did was essentially we made the grids, instead of making them 10 by 10 squares, we made a triangle, we made a trapezoid, we made a smaller square, we made a bigger square. And so whenever the players got to the new grid, they had to kind of almost find a new solution to that problem. And it's played essentially just like Keep Away, so it's live, but there's 3 central focus areas, or more if you want to add them, or less, where the players will then kind of, it gets more compact, essentially like you would going towards goal. If you want to see visuals of this this drill, we have it posted on our Instagram, and it will be posted to our YouTube and as an article moving forward. Now to Jake.